Our next conversation is about the business of culture. As we know, Nigeria is shaping the global imagination, music, arts, performance, theater, all of it. I mean, we all hear every day about like egusi and fufu and the jollof rice wars, and this is all part of it. A lot of our vocabulary has become part of global parlance as well. And our next panel, we want to discuss creativity as national power. But really, the question we're asking is for the next 65 years, how can we turn this to ownership, to investment, and how can we see long-term creative infrastructure flow back to Nigeria? And to help us moderate, facilitate, instigate, just cook up that conversation, I'd like to invite the Editor-in-Chief, Marie Claire Nigeria, Denise Esiemo Kumo, to the stage, as she'll be leading that conversation. Welcome, Denise. Welcome, Denise. I will also like to invite our panelists. We have Giles Papiat, who is the Group Head of Fine Art at Bonhams. Welcome, Giles. We also have Richard Vedilago, who is a cultural entrepreneur and the brain house of Now House at Lagos at the Federal Palace Hotel. I'm feeling the vibe on that table, on those two tables there. It's like a rock star table going on. I'd also like to invite Abubakar Suleiman, who is the MD CEO of Sterling Bank. Thank you. So take it away.
Hello? Okay. All right, we're good. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the panel session, Creativity as National Power. Of course, we've had a lot of conversations this evening about how important and pertinent our creative economy here is in Nigeria. It truly is a billion-dollar creative industry. We have lots of global culture, film, art, and fashion, and the most pertinent question remains, how can we shift this from just a cultural sensation to actual industry? So that's what we're here for. And at the end of this discussion, I want to challenge everyone in this room to think of the Nigerian creative industry not just as something that contributes to global cultural dominance, but is a thriving, living, breathing economic machine in and of itself. So happy to have you all here. So my first question is for you, Giles. You've seen the trajectory of African art on the global stage. From your vantage point at Bonhams, how do you think Nigeria can better translate its creative acclaim into long-term economic ownership? You have to. Oh.
Hello, yes. You're absolutely right. We've seen an extraordinary growth in Nigerian art and the nominal values of Nigerian art. When I first brought Nigerian art to the international market, it was not well known. It was not well known at all. And now it is universally appreciated and admired, and we've sold paintings for millions and millions of pounds in London. But how do you monetize that and extend that? I think one has to keep doing what one's doing. It is extraordinary, and Obi touched on this, the power that Nigerians have, the energy, the effervescence, and one has to keep that. And I think the creative individuals here in Nigeria are extraordinary. I mean, time is the big sifter of talent. I think not all of them will survive, but the ones that are good are very good. And we will see them in the future. And I think they show their faces in my world, which is the international art world, and show their faces very strongly. So it is a very rosy future for Nigerian artists, certainly.
Okay, so I have a follow-up question to that. In terms of other emerging markets for art like Asia and then Latin America too as well, do you think that there are any models that we in Africa and Nigeria specifically can adopt for our own economic growth?
Hello? Yes. I think that the one area that Nigeria could improve is the system of galleries and support for artists. It is very well developed across the rest of the world. Here, yes, it is developed, but it could be stronger. I mean, to call art a business does not diminish the meaning of that. It only recognizes the reality.
Yeah.
Art is a business, and as a business, it gives artists a future, it gives them a living, it stops them just being a hobbyist. So you have to allow art to be a business and encourage galleries, and if the gallery system could be enhanced and improved here in Nigeria, it would be to the benefit of all artists. That would be and in other parts of the world, it is probably better developed than here in Nigeria.
Yes, I think what you said about art being a business is a very important part, because what we have here is a lot of creatives take what they do as maybe a hobby, but not necessarily a profession. So, Richard, that brings me to my question for you. From a real estate perspective, and an infrastructure perspective, where exactly does art live? And how can physical spaces, third spaces, which is something that a lot of people mention is not really present in our society anymore because of a lot of the industrialization. So how can we create those spaces where art can thrive as both business and community expression?
Is this working? Okay, yeah. Look, I think any space is, especially when you're thinking about it in a cultural sense, is a space for independent thinking. And I think that can happen as long as there are four walls around you. I think the idea now of actually how do we reimagine that is by actually doing more, actually going about and actually understanding the facets of what it means to create community, to create dialogue. I think people sort of understand art in various different forms, whether it's music, whether it's art, whether it's fashion. But the most important thing is that it creates conversation, it creates dialogue. And I think we need to empower spaces that allow people to feel more comfortable, to have dialogue, to feel more empowered, and to feel that they can actually have a voice and a conversation with each other. And I think that that's where we need to sort of put our attention. Any space is a cultural space, as long as people are talking culture in that space. And I think we need to kind of like get more people to understand that and want to participate in what that means. It means a space where if your core interest is to be creative and to push together a narrative or a point of view, then you've created a cultural space. And I think we kind of have to take ownership of that. Shops, creating experiences, creating conversations that are unified to their point of view and allow for individuals to actually come out and flourish. And I think that's what I've always tried to do with all the spaces that we've had, whether it's a Na House or whether it's a Windsor Gallery. It's just create spaces where people feel comfortable and people want to engage in conversation. How we go about presenting art as a viable business is one thing, and again, creating the engagement and interest that people might have because they want to be part of that sort of, whether it's contemporary or whether it's art or whether it's fashion. But I think that juxtapositioning of actually creating spaces where people can actually feel empowered is the key catalyst to getting people to want to spend money, to want to engage with, and want to actually discover new spaces.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a very robust answer. Quite enjoyed that. But of course, to build all these spaces, there's one thing on everyone's mind: money. Yes, of course, we all need money. So I'm coming to you, Abubakar. I'm sure you can tell. So Sterling Bank has been quite vocal over the years about financing innovation, sustainability, and all its other various cultural projects. But I would like to know what models are particularly available for people in the creative space who have everything figured out except for the finances.
Well, you said have everything figured out except for the finances. What else have you figured out? I mean, on a serious note, if you haven't figured out the finance, I don't think you haven't figured it out. Right. So the problem, where we see the problem, it's that the information in the market or in the information from the sector that should lead to financing is unavailable. The most trusted information is the marketplace. So most of the sectors we finance, it's very easy to determine price, to determine who the buyers are. There is significant liquidity, means there are multiple buyers. There's some level of predictability. Art is the exact opposite. Up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, you've got to be in the inner circle to know what is actually going on. There was literally no coverage in the media. Where there was coverage, it wasn't from the perspective of what could scale. It was the emotion, the memories. So what we followed the art for was the enjoyment of the art. Nobody really cared about how the artist survived. So the first challenge is, how do we make sure we create a connection between the artist and the marketplace? And that starts with figuring out which market are you selling to, because it starts with, if you don't know the market you're selling to, then you're not presenting your work in a way that will get to that market and they'll understand it. The second challenge is, how do we then make sure that the language of the artist at some level can be translated for financiers, because we don't understand it. I had a meeting earlier this morning with a team that presented to me 4 artists that were going to perform in December, for 30 December. The cheapest was going to cost them $700,000, and the most expensive was over $2 million.
That's serious.
And I had no idea what they were talking about, because I don't know exactly where the $2 million is going to come back from. And it doesn't mean it doesn't come back. We just don't speak the language of the creative space. So there is need for us to have these kind of conversations with open mind, where we try to express why it is so difficult for banking or for banks to finance art, and then we try to understand how we can help them. If you ask me today, the most important thing we can do is to create a fund that is not banking fund, that is not regulated fund, that is dedicated to the art, but to make sure that it's done in a very transparent way, so that the fund trades and people can see how it performs. It takes that kind of information to then bring in both investors, which is the first layer of funding that must come into the art, but also to then bring in debt financing. Debt is the most difficult, because the volatility in the price of art, for instance, I can't tell you if it's worth $1 million or 100,000, but he can tell you. So a bank is not going to put money there, because when it's worth $1 million, the artist or the collector gets the profit. When it's worth $10,000, I lose the money. Right, so there is a need for a common language where artists and financiers can connect, and collectively they can approach the market.
Thank you so much. Richard, you look like you have some thoughts on this whole situation. I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the language that banks want to really hear at the end of the day is de-risk, right? It's how to de-risk your sort of exposure with any kind of, whether it's someone approaching a bank with a business plan or an idea. The bank wants to be de-risked. They're using not their money, they're using other people's money to invest in your business. So there is also a fiduciary responsibility that the banks have, not just to say the creative space is the new hot buzzword. We have to create products for that. I mean, one of the things that we're doing with Windsor Gallery is that we're building out galleries all across the continent to give market entrenchment and give the opportunity to have multiple buyers in multiple markets. With that, then we'll come and have a conversation with the guys at Sterling Bank and say, you know what, let's produce a product that allows you to loan against certain artists who are specifically sought after. It's a supply and demand. Again, because we have galleries in 20 different countries in the African continent, they're going to feel safer to loan against, because they know that if tomorrow somebody doesn't pay back, we have access to liquidate their asset, because it's an asset class now.
Yeah.
That's the kind of conversations banks want to have. Today, it's very easy to say that banks will just pay you or give you money based on your creative talent. That doesn't work. It's about structure. Yeah. It's about also understanding and putting together the funnels to allow for a supply and demand model to come into place, and more African buyers to start buying art, which creates the supply and demand model that we're all looking for. It's a vicious cycle, unfortunately, but it is what it is. We can't say that we on the continent are not consuming enough. Obi just talked about that actively. Yeah. We're not consuming our own products at this moment in time. That's because we don't understand it, because we undervalue it to a certain degree, because we believe that a guy who's creating beautiful gowns, I can go to my tailor down the road and pay half the price for it, because the value derivative system's not in place. But we're getting there. With more private sector individuals and more people coming in and building and taking positions, we will see that active change, and we will see financial institutions coming to the market, because we built a market. The market doesn't exist yet, but we're building it. And I think together, through these kind of discourses, these kind of opportunities, these kind of events that Anita's putting together, and the whole team to actually create more visibility in what's happening, more business people, culture. I got an F in art in school. Shows how much like I was crap, really crap at art.
I can imagine.
But I managed to excel in one way or the other in business, and in then understanding what I want to build for spaces that I want to feel comfortable in. And so by default, we are taking one step at a time. We're building foundation, we're building blocks to one day be able to then build an active market that everybody can participate in. But it doesn't happen overnight, and I don't think sometimes it's just like, why isn't government doing more, or why isn't financial institutions doing more? We, as active participants, need to do
a bit more. Thank you so much for that. You actually touched on a point which is leading me to my next question. Giles, this is for you. So basically, it's all about how we have this phenomenon of where people are really brilliant creatives. They're here on the continent, no one knows anything about them, and then, they go abroad, and then all of a sudden they're this very big, very massive cultural export. And then, of course, we haven't been able to keep any of that in the continent. So now Nigeria, Africa has lost this very big contributor to, the creative economy and its creative power. So my question to you is, what can we do to make sure that we keep African creatives, even if they have a global worldview, participants basically of the creative economy here in Africa?
I think, when you say you've lost them, you haven't lost them. They're out there, be it in the West Coast of America, wherever their studio is, and I'm talking here about artists. They're working, they'll be Nigerians, they'll be Africans, and the benefit is still coming home reputationally. I think it is difficult because artists, as I've said before, they have to eat to live. They have to have a business. And if an artist can sell works for £150,000 a painting by going to work in Los Angeles, well, why shouldn't they? It is a business. As I've said before, one has to realize art is a business. So I don't think you see these wonderful artists, as I say, working out there. I would also say some are coming back. I look at, for example, the artist Kehinde Wiley. Now, he is now based in Ghana, in Accra, and he has come back. The Year of the Return was a great thing for Ghana and brought an awful lot of creatives back there. And there are a lot of artists still working here in Nigeria. But you're right, a lot have left for essentially the glory and perhaps the pecuniary rewards they can get abroad, and that is understandable. As I've said, I'm a great believer in not thinking that art as a business is a bad thing to say. I think it has to be a business. People have to live, and why should? And if you look at what's happening here this week in Lagos, you've got ArtX. You've got an awful lot of tourists, people coming into Lagos, coming into Nigeria. Why? Because of art. So it is a great wealth generator, and I think that is important.
I think so too. Thank you so much for that answer. So Suleiman, my next question is for you. So you work very closely, in finance with the government. So there are a lot of private sector, but as well public sector policies that can help create artists, protect them, protect their IPs and the rest of them. So do you think from the existing framework that we have currently in Nigeria, do you think that there's anything missing? And how can we potentially bridge that gap to further protect artists over the next 65 years, basically?
Hello? Okay. So let me dial back a little bit on something we said earlier about de-risking art. I don't think we're asking, or we should be asking the artist or the business people in the art world to de-risk it for us. What we should be asking for is to fill in the gaps. There are a lot of information gap that means that I cannot apply any banking model to art. So I need to work with them to understand it, to fill in the gap. I need to keep information, I need a storytelling, which then takes me to what could be doing in terms of framework. And this is not necessarily for art alone, this is for other creative work that we do. How do we use technology to be able to identify the work that is being created, to be able to assign ownership to that work, and to be able to make that work transferable? In other words, how do we move from just digitizing some of the physical work itself to tokenizing the ownership. And this is important because of the weak judicial framework around which we operate. If I know, for instance, that I could invest $100 in a fraction of a work that's worth $100,000, what you're doing is you're moving from digitizing to tokenizing, and from tokenization, you are now financializing.
Yeah.
What it means is, I was looking at Obi Asika's cap. That's a unique piece of work. If he had that tokenized and the ownership resides on whoever holds the token, we could trade it right now. And he's just a custodian. He can continue to wear the cap, but I own the right to that piece of work. I think we need to think like that. Nigeria and Africa has done well by leapfrogging. We cannot attempt to replicate the world that's gone, 100 years of the way art and creative work has been treated. But with the power of blockchain, we can tokenize the title. What it does is, first and foremost, the right of the artist is protected.
Yeah.
Because the moment it's created and is assigned to the artist and there's a framework for it. Secondly, it becomes a financial instrument. Like you could literally borrow against the work that you own that you don't even want to sell, because that right, you can put a lien on it and you get access to money. But most importantly, because it's tokenized, you've globalized it. Anyone, anywhere can buy a piece of work that you've put on a chain and someone can pay for it, and then you can have it delivered. Now, does the infrastructure for this exist? Do we have the regulation for it? The answer is there is enough for us to start. The rest of it will be figured out as we start to get into the marketplace. But it takes someone with the courage and with the resources to start to create that space, and then we can run with it.
Thank you very much. Richard, I would love to hear your thoughts too as well, because I saw you I saw the gears going. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too.
Art is working.
Yeah, just pull it a bit closer.
I mean, art is very much like real estate, I think. The sort of the fractional ownership model becomes less personal to something that is personal to you. When you're buying art, you at the end of the day derive the value that's associated to it. The multitude of the markets, if you think about it, the sort of the top performing, or at auction, for example, it's an individual buyer spending $150 million for a Basquiat. So the idea of actually creating a capital market that is largely based on multiple participants, it's about understanding each market for what it says. Like you said, the information that's derived and what happens. Today, we've seen sort of things like NFTs come into play, and that has been tokenized, and that has been multiple participants, and that has failed as a product. Not every product, because of the way that we sometimes think about it. I mean, art is one of the oldest selling products that we've seen in time. It goes all the way back to the Da Vinci's, who are it's a model that's worked consistently over centuries. It's not us today that's going to change that model. It's us today that's going to adapt our model to our reality. And of course, Nigeria's reality is that the financial institutions and the structures that we have historically haven't allowed us, even like if you think about the real estate market, it is a cash-based market majority. You try and get a loan today from a bank at 22%. It's not going to be in your favor, but the infrastructures that the banks allow and build and work with government to create capital, to build more roads, to allow for better property prices to go up and new developments, that's where we're looking at infrastructure. Infrastructure to then get more people to understand art, because if the banks now start coming in and start underwriting it, it will allow other people to understand value. From that, then you get insurers coming in, because of course where the banks go, the insurers goes, then you get a double valuation on a product that never really existed. Even if it's one guy, it's just going to allow us to shift our perspective of what value is. And I think that's really where I think the conversation needs to be had. How are we creating a better platform for people to understand value to this product?
Thank you. So I've just been given a signal by the moderator that we need to wrap up. Yes. But of course, there's a purpose to this conversation, and we want to not only secure Nigeria's creative future, but we want to look into, what the next 65 years could be. And we're all stakeholders of that conversation, because we all have our own individual networks and the people that we work with and can further inspire, even if we might not be here to see those changes. So I have one final question for each of you. What is one very particular mindset shift that we can all have towards our creative industry? that can really help make the difference going forward? Giles, I think we can begin with you.
I think that the mindset shift that would change things for a lot of artists, I suppose, to be honest, is to stop, though it's a business, is to stop chasing the market. So when artists start chasing the market and trying to produce work for the market, it nearly always ends in disaster. And in my career, the one thing I've learnt, and I've always told myself, is when you're looking at a painting and you're speaking to an artist, be honest. Don't even tell white lies. Be completely honest, and it will stand you in good stead, because if you sugarcoat it, and if someone is producing something that is, you can see, has been produced purely for the market and for sale, it will normally end in disaster. So I think the big mindset shift, I would say, is do not look at the market, look at what you're doing. Concentrate on what you're doing, because if you do that, you will be rewarded.
Thank you so much. Richard, can we have you, please?
Yeah, look, I think the ownership is stop waiting for anybody to do what you can do yourself. I think the ultimate truth is that if you want to build out something, you can build it. It's going to take sweat, tears, and a lot of ups and downs. But if you're, I think my favorite saying is success is going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. It is really about keeping it moving and just ensuring that you're part of the market. Just keep it moving.
Thank you so much. Abubakar, can we have you, please?
For me, I want us to think beyond creativity as a gift and start to see the creative industry as a profession. Yes, the gift is necessary and is a foundation for it, but unless we start to think about it as a profession, which means we have to train people to know how to relate with all the other stakeholders in their business, they're going to always be at the mercy of some middlemen who are not interested in the artist.
Thank you so much. I'm personally very excited for the next 65 years of our creative economy. And just to wrap up what we've all discussed here, if there's anything that you will take away from this panel discussion, I want you to remember that your creativity and your art is not just something that you can do, but it is a viable business that can be supported by the right institutions, by the right people, and by the right networks. So please keep creating, keep fostering our precious, precious creative economy. And I guess we'll see you in the next 65 years, God willing.
Thank you very much. A big round of applause to Denise for handling such a wonderful conversation. Thank you to our panelists, Giles, Richard, and Abubakar Suleiman. Thank you so much.